And dear friends, please join me now in our opening sentences. With heavy hearts and heavy world, we meet you this night, O Christ. In your clenched hands, stretched and nailed, you gather us. With strength only you can give, even now, and with a courage only you can know, may we find you in the powerless of our world. And as life teeters and eternity weeps, may we see through love's pain into love's promise and love's victory. Please be seated. And please join me in prayer of confession. We bring to you, O Lord, our awareness of violence in ourselves and the world. We bring to you, O Lord, our anger over the world, over ourselves. We bring to you, O Lord, our fears of alienation and of loneliness. And now, if you can, please stand for the words of assurance.
Words of assurance. The Holy One does not hide from us, but is the attentive ear when we cry out.
Through community, God restores us to the pathways of life. Please be seated.
Scripture lesson, Psalm 22, verses 1 through 21. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb, safe my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. Since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls encircled me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They wide open their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. And it is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a pochette. Sticks to my jaw, mainly in the dust of death. For dogs are all around me. My hands and feet have shriveled. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves. They cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. Help me to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword. Save me from the mouth of the lion. And rescue me.
Dear friends, this is the psalm for this day. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is how Gospel of Mark puts the words of Psalm 22 on the lips of the crucified Jesus. First, we will look at this from three different perspectives. And first will be the political scandal of crucifixion. Crucifixion was an institutional state terrorism, violent and brutal form of execution, a spectacle reserved for those whom the Roman Empire wanted to oppress and suppress, whom they wanted to make into an repulsive display, a warning for others. And friends, one is reminded of the deadly violence against our black neighbors by the racist vigilante, like in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, or by police like Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, George Floyd, and just a few days ago, Patrick Loyola. And of course, there are many, 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 many more names. Romans wanted to oppress and suppress and terrorize. And they did it also by imposing silence. Because in polite society, crucifixion was taboo. Among people, it was hardly ever mentioned. Hundreds and hundreds more, thousands and thousands of people were crucified by Roman regime, by empire. And in ancient sources, not a beep about them, just here and there a hint, and polite way of speaking about it, mentioning it. If you don't count, of course, Christians who put their emphasis on contrary on it. One is again reminded of our racist situation. Yes, media are preying on those killings. But imagine that we here in this church have received a letter protesting our Black Lives Matter banner, which is hanging over the street. Now, it is not there, but not because we would listen to those who sent us that letter. Simply the wind took it down, and it'll be returned back. It did not stop with that protesting letter. Someone even complained and made accusation all the way to our city council person, complaining about it. And we needed to respond. In Roman times, there were some Christians who wanted to hide the scandal of cross. Of course they were there. They were called Gnostics. They made Jesus into a teacher and purveyor of religious mysteries and tried to phase the mention of cross and his dying completely out. They even said that if Jesus was crucified, it was only a show. True Jesus could not die. They were called docetic, that it was just a dream, that it was an illusion. But majority of the early Christians said their firm no to this. Our Savior was crucified, and our symbol is cross, no matter what kind of scandal it is. Our religion is not an intellectual discipline, a spiritual entertainment, nor is it just about the personal salvation of my poor, dear soul. From the beginning, our faith has been this protest against injustice, against lynching, against abuse of power, against alienation, alienating people from their neighbors, setting them apart, dividing the society. Over time, unfortunately, the cross has lost most of this original meaning. It is not any longer scandal. In our times, it needs to be explained. And one of the ways of explaining it is with that banner. Banner is going nowhere. It is coming back. It will be hanging over the 73rd Street. It will be present here in Upper West Side, no matter whether people like it or not. It is integral part of our faith and who we are. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is how is it in the Gospel of Matthew. In the second step, I want to talk about the scandal of radical loneliness. We actually do not know the last words of Jesus historically. This is the earliest attempt to come up with something. Why am I saying it? Because all the disciples were not there. They ran away. Perhaps Peter might have been there for a little longer than other disciples, trying to follow his master to his place where he was detained overnight. But we know how it ended. He ran away as well. That was it. All were gone. There were no Christian or disciple witnesses. Jesus died alone. And so all the passion and narratives in the Gospels from that point on of his detention, all the 14 stations of the cross, all the 7 last words of Christ from the cross, all of that is pious storytelling, fabulation, imagination, theology. We saw that Mark, or that group around Mark, the school of Mark, his church, went for their inspiration to Psalm 22. The cry of God, this quotation from Psalm 22 is the earliest Christian attempt for reconstruction because it is so raw and so real to reality we know about crucifixion in ancient times. And it still reflects the original deep guilt among the first disciples. This loneliness of their master and their abandonment of him. Later on, we observe attempts to soften and sanitize this scandal, this tone of loneliness and desperation. Evangelists Luke and John erase this cry completely. There is no mention of Psalm 22 in their Gospels. And made Jesus ever more in command, forgiving executioners, talking with fellow crucified, even arranging adoption of beloved disciples and Mary. And finally, on his own willing, commanding his last breath to divine hands. In the Gospel of John, it goes even further, pronouncing the fulfillment of his ministry. But the cry of God to God, this quotation from the Psalm 22 must be the oldest attempt because it is so raw so real, so truthful for a person dying of positional asphyxiation on a cross. That's how they died, because of their outstretched position. Their chest unable to breathe, and that way being asphyxiated, suffocating, unable to breathe. And here I cannot unremember what we heard in the process over the killing, over the murder of George Floyd. The expert witnesses of pulmonologists talking about it, describing almost identical situation. And George Floyd calling mama, also being positionally suffocated by the representatives of the state authority in presence of horrified onlookers. Evangelist Luke and John might attempt to sanitize those last words, but deep in our tradition is this painful guilt over the unjust, unlawful death, and that we did not and do not do enough. And because the cross has lost most of this original meaning, in our times, it needs to be explained. And it is explained also, besides other things, with that banner, Black Lives Matter. And that banner is going nowhere. It will be hanging there over 73rd Street again. Finally, Eli, Eli, lama azafdani. That is how it sounds in the Hebrew Bible. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you distant when I groan for help? The third and most radical step is the theological scandal. Theological scandal it is. At the core of each and every religion is the God who rewards the good and punishes the evil. Putting the cry of radical abandonment, even by God, abandonment by God, on the lips of Jesus is a big departure from this traditional religiosity of sticks and carrots. Trust in God does not lead to deliverance, friends. Early Christians here, represented by Mark and Matthew, were truly radical in this. They were so radical that they got scared of their radicalism. And so Evangelist Luke and John, as I mentioned, they started to soften it. They could not change the fact that Jesus died on the cross, so they at least made him more in control, as we heard in the previous mention when I talked about the other part. But the question of theodicy, the problem of divine justice, how come that God can be this sleeping, unjust? That problem of divine theodicy remained and remains. No matter what you might hear from different religious zealots and evangelists, Christian God is not Deus ex machina, divine puppeteer. Jesus' cry of lowliness, even abandonment by God, is an argument against God puppeteer, pulling the strings of the world, against the prosperity gospel, against religion of selfishness. We trust in God not because we desire divine reward. We seek justice not because we are afraid of any divine punishments. Faith is not popularity contest. Not before God, and certainly not before other people. We follow Christ in our faithfulness to God, not because it would make our lives easier or because we are scared of eternal damnation. We do it regardless. It makes our lives more difficult and sometimes more dangerous. And because the cross, this cross, with a radical scandal, theological scandal, because this cross has lost its original meaning. In our times, it needs to be explained. Explained even with a banner of Black Lives Matter. And that banner is going nowhere. It is going to be back and will be hanging over our street, over our neighborhood, over our city. It is a core value of our faith. Now, dear friends, please join me in our response, prayer response. In the shadow of all suffering is the suffering of Jesus. In the shadow of all weakness is the vulnerability of the Christ. In the shadow of all pain is the God who cries out. We are never rejected. We are never left alone. Now please join me in our closing prayer. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe through the night, and we will believe into the dawn. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe beyond torture, and we will believe into freedom. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe against spectacle of evil, and will believe into divine healing touch. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe beyond alienation and loneliness, and we will believe into embrace of divine love. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe against the darkness, and we will believe into the light. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe beyond the cross, and we will believe through the resurrection. We will not go from here believing this is all there is. We will believe through the night, and we will believe into the dawn.